This is Dune Talk, a DuneNewsNet.com production. Join us now for the latest Dune news, reactions, and lively discussions.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Dune Talk. So excited to be here today, especially because this is the first of our sub-series where we're going to be reviewing the Dune movie in detail. And just to get ahead of it, yes, there will be a lot of spoilers here, so we recommend definitely watching the movie yourself if you haven't. Otherwise, check out a couple of our recent episodes from last week. We have two great ones. So having said that, looking forward to talk everything about Dune Part 1, the movie with you. Here today with Garin.
Hey, this is Garin. Good to see everyone again. I am on Twitter at Dune Companion. I have not seen it. I'm going to see it in 3.5 hours, but I am excited to hear whatever these guys want to tell me. So I'm all ears.
Yes, and this is Johnny Sobchak. You know where I'm at. I did see it. I saw it last night in IMAX. Nearly 24 hours ago was when my showing was started. And then I came right home and I was like just buzzing about it. And I threw it on HBO Max. And I pretty much ran through it a whole second time while I was doing some things and getting review shaped up. So yeah, I'm fully I'm in the headspace now. I can't wait. I'm going to the theater again very shortly as soon as this is over to go. So I'm ready to discuss.
And how many tickets did you say you had lined up for the next
I have
days?
So that was the first one last night, and I have 3 more actually booked up right now. So
nice.
Actually, no, I have 4 more booked up right now.
That's awesome. And I'm also doing my part. So I confirmed next week. So there's going to be a team outing at work. So we're doing the private theater rental. So a whole group for watching Dune. And looking forward to watching it more and more times on HBO Max until then as well. So let's just go ahead and jump straight into some movie news.
Dune movie news.
So before we go into our full spoilery discussion about the movie, I just wanted to briefly touch on box office, just having a quick look ahead. I'll start with you, Johnny. So the news came out today that Dune had a strong performance in terms of the early previews. So making over was it 5 million on the Thursday night screenings. So how are you feeling right now? Do you think that the projections, do you think they make sense, or should we be secretly hoping for even better?
Yeah, probably closer to the latter, if I'm being honest. Of course, by the time this is out and people are listening to it, we'll know the answer. But I've been saying this all along. I've been optimistic about it, and as we've gotten closer, I've become more optimistic. And this week, before the movie actually came out, they did have final projections in the neighborhood of 30 to 35 million. And I immediately knew that was underestimating, largely in part due to HBO Max, because it is such a wild card and because it has so heavily been affecting major films this year. Most notably, I'd say is Suicide Squad really had trouble, and that was another big budget movie. This going to have a much easier time, it seems like. It honestly looks like it'll be closer to potentially 50 million than 30 million, and Suicide Squad, they even cracked 30 million. So that is a good sign. I would say 40 it looks pretty good. Whether that's right around 40 or 45 or close to even 50, it's hard to say. But the numbers last night, as you mentioned, Thursday night previews were very, very impressive, very promising. And especially the IMAX numbers. I think the IMAX numbers were phenomenal. It broke the record for the indexed on a Thursday night preview of straight up IMAX showings in North America. I think it overtook, Dunkirk from a few years ago, Christopher Nolan's film. So that says a lot. They have really been pushing that in marketing. And I think those, premium format tickets are going to be a big part of what pushes this to overperform in a lot of instances, because, people might be seeing on HBO Max, but the people that are going to the theater, they're paying extra to watch it in IMAX or Dolby and things like that. And that's another thing that we've been talking about all along too, even in the foreign markets where it's been, that was mentioned as a big factor. So I'm happy. I think it's going to be good. I think it's going to do fine. I think we're going to be fine is the overall sentiment at this point.
Yeah. And you made up a good point about that. Yeah, some of these comparisons are like comparing to films that was pre-pandemic. So the fact that they're saying, these were better previews, like breaking some record there, that's impressive, because there are still, as we were discussing, like in the previous weeks, there are still people who are hesitant, like especially in the older demographic, who are not going back to cinemas as often now. So I think definitely promising, and yeah. So we'll be reporting on the final numbers in a couple of days from now. And then before I go close the news segment, I did want to touch on one quote that came out yesterday. So we had, of course, there was an article from Deadline that was ahead of the WarnerMedia quarterly results. And there was a quote there from Ann Sarnoff, the WarnerMedia chair and CEO, and she basically said, in response to whether there are going to be continuations to Dune, will we have a sequel to Dune? If you watch the movie and you see how it ends, I think you pretty much know the answer to that. So I mean, like it's pretty clear in a way. I mean, they didn't come straight out and say it, but I think the message is there that they're behind this property. So Garin, let me first hear your reaction. Like, are you surprised by that? Are you happy about it?
Oh, I was absolutely over the moon when I read that. In fact, I tweeted out, I said, hey, I think we're going to get Dune Part 2. Now, Johnny probably knows more about all the intricacies of this than I do, but to me, that sounded like the legal person or the lawyer saying, no, you can't say this, but you could maybe allude to that or what. So I don't know, Johnny, come on. Isn't that a hint that this is possible?
Oh, of course it's possible. But I wouldn't say this is why it's possible necessarily. I think this does not make me feel any different than I felt before it was said, is basically my feeling. Not to burst any bubbles here, but and I say that from a place of confidence, though. It's not from a place of, Warner Brothers is going to screw them over. I don't trust Warner Brothers. I don't care what this woman is saying about it. That's not the case. I think that she does mean that, but we already knew that, really. I mean, we have heard time and time again, they support the film. They are pushing this heavily. They support Villeneuve. They've been marketing it like crazy. And as Villeneuve himself said, the box office would have to be really bad for this to not justify a part 2. Because they know what the pandemic is affecting. That's why they did the HBO Max deal in the first place. And they know that the HBO Max deal as it stands is, what has been significantly affecting box office. So they're not dumb, and they are not, every day they're not, HBO Max, like the box office is so bad, but we're not going to blame on HBO Max. Of course they know HBO Max is a factor. And I guarantee the HBO Max numbers are going to look good this weekend. They are going to be positive, and Warner Brothers is going to be happy about that. So I think this is good. I think that this coming out on Thursday, the day the movie was coming out, was a nice little kind of like last little push to the fans to be like, hey, it's going to be okay. But I was already thinking that it'll be all right anyway. So I would say also nothing is confirmed until they say it's confirmed. We're doing part 2. Because she didn't say we're doing part 2. She said, well, if you watch the ending, you could take this away or feel this way about it. Yeah, we know that it's on a cliffhanger. But you have not said, hey, Villeneuve, here's 150, $180 million, go make part 2. When that happens and Villeneuve himself says, they said I can do it, we're doing it, that's when I'll be popping champagne and posting that on Twitter. But that until then, I'm still just like, it's going to happen. But when they say it, that's when I'll be excited and really buzzing.
And it's an important point because this came from the context of, they're bullish about all their properties. They're basically saying, like, we know that there's a pandemic, we know that we chose this strategy, and we're not going to penalize these properties because of that. Like, and they were talking about Dune, but also the Sopranos prequel, which is potentially going to get continuations. But yeah, this is overall like a vote of confidence in like the franchises that they've chosen to invest in, and like I'm totally aligned with you, Johnny. I mean, like from the beginning, especially, but what we've been hearing all these past months, I think it's pretty clear like that the intention here is to do continuations. Of course, things need to work out, but yeah, like it just surprises me to no end, like how afraid some people are. Like I'm trying to like say to these people, shake some people on social media, like, do not fear. Like, I mean, this is happening. I don't know, like, why people are so afraid about these things. Believe me, guys, like, people know how good this movie is. Like, people, it's going to win some awards. Let's be fair. Like, we I'm not going to like give an exact prediction, but I know that Johnny, you have like this film is going to get recognition. And if you really believe that they're just going to like drop it by the wayside, like it didn't make pre-pandemic levels of blockbuster, no, like Dune is a major event, and like they want to continue this, and of course, like it's not official, but I think like the sentiment is already there. So hopefully they'll announce it officially sooner than later. But yeah, like hearing it like after Villeneuve's comments, and also now hearing it directly from WarnerMedia themselves, I think it's just reinforcement. Go ahead, since we don't have as much time this week, and jump to reactions to watching the movie. So I gave my first reactions last week. So today, Johnny, the floor is yours. So give me your first thoughts coming out of that theater from the previous screening.
Yeah, well, anyone who follows me on Twitter, probably people who don't even follow me on Twitter, saw my tweets yesterday coming out of it. It was just like very overwhelming is like probably the number one word I would use, because not only is it overwhelming in a sensory experience sort of way, but also, as someone who has read the book, as someone who's been looking forward to this for so long, is a huge fan of Villeneuve, is a huge fan of sci-fi in general and movies in general. This was, it was really what I wanted out of this experience, and surprised me in a number of ways, which is always good, because especially when you're following a movie this closely and as long as I have been, there were genuine moments where I was like, wow, I didn't know they were going to do it. That was really like smart, or I forgot that was in the book, or there was one moment, I can't remember. I'll have to go back and watch when I watch the movie again, see if I can remember. But there was one moment where I was just like giggling in my seat to myself, like, of course, as the score is like blaring around me, like no one can hear me laughing, because it's not a funny moment, but I was just like, I was just like giddy with like a moment that happened, and I was like, that's like perfect. Like, I really like that. So it was exactly what I wanted. It is very much, part one to this novel, of a larger saga that is clearly in the works, as we've been discussing ad nauseum. But as its own film, as its own experience, I was still satisfied with this as a contained narrative. And I am very surprised by the amount of people who are maybe not as satisfied or are disappointed to some degree, just because I feel, even with all the Lord of the Rings comparisons, for example, like Fellowship of the Ring, I love Lord of the Rings. It's like, I consider that just one big movie, just like how I'll probably consider Dune to be one big movie after second part comes out. And I think Fellowship, which is probably my favorite out of those, I think that is less of a contained narrative than this movie, because, if we never get part two, which isn't going to happen, but if we were to never get a part two, it would still be a story. Like, it would still be something where you're like, I'm waiting for one particular thing to happen after this, or I need something else to happen after this. In the way this movie ends, it doesn't really require that. It's not like you're waiting for Frodo to go drop the ring in Mount Doom at the end. Like, they're not going out to do something specific. You just know Paul and Jessica are with the Fremen now. And that is kind of where the film closes off. We don't get to see the Fremen culture. We don't get to see the inside of the siege. We don't get to see the full extent of their communities. There's no water, water of life. I've heard that phrase more than I can count in the last, year or so. And there's no water of life to be seen here. I think that'll make for a very interesting sequence in part 2. But in listening to Villeneuve talk about the process of deciding where they were going to end it, because that was something I was very curious about, how they came to that conclusion and, how they felt about it afterward. And his explanation of basically how this is closing it off very much in the instance of they are now leaving the culture that they were in the entire movie. They are now stepping into a new one. They're meeting the Fremen, they're meeting Chani, they're meeting Stilgar. And I felt like that made a lot of sense. I felt like if you were to continue on, if you were to actually go into the siege, if you're actually going to go into a full-on cultural kind of, being absorbed into what their whole lifestyle is like, that really kind of, it's like you're going to get into that for 10 or 15 minutes and then you're going to end the movie. I didn't think that was, I feel like that does make sense in retrospect. And I wasn't disappointed. Now, as I said on Twitter, if they had gone on for another 30 minutes, if they gone on for another hour or 2.5 hours, I gladly would have sat there and watched it. I would have been happy to wear a still suit and not have to leave to go to the bathroom and just sit there. But this was satisfying. I think that was really the biggest takeaway, and something that I genuinely, even as someone who's very optimistic about the movie, I was a little skeptical or nervous about how satisfying it would feel as its own part, especially with the ending. And as I mentioned, the ending I thought was great. It does feel, it is very similar to Fellowship in one regard, because you have these characters that you've been following, this pair, and now they're just going off into the distance, and you're not really sure what the hell is going to happen to them. But you want to know, you want to follow them. And that was my biggest sensation, was I want to stay in this world. I want to stay with these characters and continue their story. And I think that's really important. Obviously I'm a mark, I'm a fan. That's no surprise that I felt that way, but I was glad to be proven, right in some regards, and to have any, concerns I had kind of assuaged, because this world is overwhelming, as I mentioned earlier, visually, sonically. You're not ready. Like, you could have seen a bunch of footage already, all the TV spots and featurettes and trailers. But you could have listened to the score as well, because we've had plenty of Hans Zimmer music out at this point, which has all sounded fantastic. And when it absorbs you like this movie does, it's just a different feeling. And I can't say it enough. Seeing it in the theater is different. Like, I have seen it on HBO Max, but I'm really glad the first time I saw it was in the theater with the IMAX screen and the aspect ratio expanded. Because there are just moments, when you're in the middle of the desert at night and this dune is in front of you like a mountain, and then the moons are hanging above that, and you just feel like you're like, it's just so overwhelming, and it's just, you can't replicate that. And I also have to say, for the theatrical experience, I had a packed crowd last night. Potentially the biggest crowd that I've been in the movies in a long time, since maybe before the pandemic, at least in my hometown. And it was so exciting to be in there. And because I had really been paying attention to that in the last couple of weeks, seeing how many people seemed like they were going to go, what the tickets were looking like. And in just the last couple of days, it like really filled up, and it was basically full. So that was really promising. And everyone seemed to be like wired in, like they were like totally focused. And afterward, people were talking about it, and they were talking about how good it was, how much they liked it. And so a lot of people were staying after it. It seemed like they were waiting for like a after credit scene to see if they were going to set up something else for a part 2 potentially. But so I think that's a good sign. I think that's a sign of people do have genuine interest coming out of the theater, and are going to be wanting to see a part 2, whether they liked it, loved it, or otherwise. I think that is something that people are going to at least be interested in. But really, I think this movie just delivered a lot, and in a lot of the departments that I wanted to see it done. I'm sure, Marcus, you're probably going to ask me about some specific things potentially, and I would love to talk about specifics, because every time I think back to a certain scene or a moment or a shot or something, I am like, oh, I love that so much, or that might have been my favorite. I think of like 5 or 10 other ones, and I'm like, that was my favorite. Or I like that one even more. So yeah, there's plenty to take away out of this for sure.
So before we go into some other specifics, like you were talking a lot about the ending, and like I just want to also, because I didn't want to spoil this last week. So let's look. If you look at the reviews, whether it's like critics' reviews or some of the other reviews, like there were like overwhelmingly positive, but when you look at the negative ones, of course there were like several themes, but like the main theme was about the ending. And to me, like I feel like if that's the main criticism of this movie, then that's like a triumph, because like from my perspective, this ending was perfect, as you were saying, like even before, because I was, both of us were involved in the community and having all those discussions about, where is it going to end, is it going to have Water of Life scene or not. And from the beginning, like when I had like gotten in the feel for how long the movie was going to be, I said, no, I think like ending it with the fight after Jameis is going to be the perfect ending point, because I don't want them to rush that scene where they come into the siege and they're experiencing the Fremen culture for the first time. I feel that's going to be like so important, and I hope that they do spend time on that in the next film, which I think that's totally the idea, because we got to see like excellent acting from Zendaya and Javier Bardem for these key characters in the Fremen, and I'm looking forward to see a lot more of them in the next movie. Like they're obviously going to have major roles, so there's so much possibility from them, and the way it ended, you had this climactic moment where, as you were alluding to earlier, like Paul has gone through this journey, like going from his culture, a place of privilege where he was sheltered in a safe planet. He's coming to Arrakis and like in danger, and his family and house is decimated, and now he's transitioned into a new culture. Basically, the movie ends. He's being accepted, and then the story is going to continue from there. And I love that final scene that now I can talk about, like with the sandworm, that you basically see this this amazing breathtaking sequence, especially when you see it in the theater of the Fremen riding the sandworm, and it gives the first hint of like all the possibilities and like the things that we don't even know about this culture. So yeah, I think an ending, like I was happy with it. I mean, at the end of the day, this is 2 parts, and you have to end it someplace, and I think that they made the right choice here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm spot on, I think, with you on that, especially the thing with the worm, and really just that last. It's not even like the last, because the movie ends with the Jamis fight, and then it continues on for like another minute or two as they're leaving, as they're carrying his body deeper into the desert. They say, that we need to get to Siege, and that. The way they wrap it all together, like that was what impressed me the most with regards to the ending, was it comes together with Paul and Jessica, as you mentioned, desert power, seeing the worm, seeing the Fremen riding it, because it's hinted at all these things that come together in the last like 30 seconds in the movie, wrap up and piece together things that were present earlier in the movie or throughout the movie. So you have, like Kynes, for example, is getting ready to ride a worm earlier in the movie. And I'm like, oh my God, I want to see this. And then, she doesn't. And so I was like, but you see, she has her hooks out. You see the worm coming toward her. And so that was like a tease. And then it's coming back to it and actually fully showing it here, and showing you what the Fremen are actually capable of. Then there's the moment where Chani and Paul are talking, and she's looking back at him. This is only the beginning. And there's the vision that Paul has been having the entire movie finally comes true and is accurate to what he had been experiencing. And he smiles, and he feels like it's really a dark, sinister ending, honestly. Like in full context as a Dune fan, it's very dark and upsetting. But in the context of literally anyone else probably watching it, they're like, oh, look at that. Like yay, he's like finally smiling. Because the whole movie is like very much upset about most of the stuff that's going on or in distress. So that was great. And then, of course, as he is leaving and walking off after Chani, Jessica is looking more grim, let's say, and less excited about what is happening because she is aware that this is like the point of no return. Paul is out of her control and is accepting his position and is poised to manipulate the Fremen and poised to take over. So I really, really liked that because it was just, again, these tiny little subtle things, and maybe to the regular moviegoer wouldn't seem like that big a deal. They wouldn't register it as meaning exactly what it means. But I thought the part with the vision, the part with the worm, Jessica and Paul, like their facial expressions, it was just like perfect. So as far as the ending, something I was worried about, I thought they nailed that.
For either of you, I think that what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing on Twitter and reactions is that for an audience, for an IMAX theater full of people, you've got some percentage of them, and maybe on the initial weekend, you've got a large percentage of those people who've read the book or are familiar with the story. So they're going to notice all these small nuances like you just got done talking about, Johnny, these things that are like, that make us as real fans giddy, but might be glossed over by a first comer, right? What do you guys think in your theater that you saw it? How many people walked out of there going, oh, the pieces all fit together and that was a satisfying experience? And how many people were either overwhelmed, because we're not hearing confusion or people are completely lost, we're hearing overwhelm or it was a lot to take in? Or so what do you guys think the non-fan, the first timer is going to experience watching this for the first time? Because I'm going to be going with a bunch tonight.
My feeling is that like even as a fan of the book, someone who has basically like lived in these worlds for years, I did feel that just one time wasn't enough. Like there are things that I picked up on that like maybe other, as you're saying, non-fans may not have picked on, but like as I'm rewatching the movie, like for example, when I was starting to write my review, I put HBO Max on, and I was like going back to specific scenes, even though like I didn't fully rewatch everything yet. And like I was picking up on more details. So like the point that you mentioned, Johnny, about like Jessica's expression, like that didn't fully register on me until later, because I was focusing on like Paul and Shani. So it's just like there's so much going on, and as you're saying, like it's overwhelming in a good way, because like there's visually, audio, and like how. It's just like everything's coming together perfectly, and there's all these details to take in. So yeah, definitely, whatever you are, like I would say, you'll need multiple viewings. For non-fans, I would say that they did like set it up in a way that there was sufficient exposition. So even if you've never heard of the story before, and I mentioned that in my review as well, I think like Dune benefits from the fact that in the past 5 years, we've had Star Wars, we've had Game of Thrones, which are series that have been inspired by elements of Dune. So now that people are familiar with a lot of those elements, like warring great houses, like science fiction epics. So like even though Dune was the original in those cases, like there are elements that you'll recognize from that perspective. And I think for the most part, the exposition was really well done and natural. That was actually one of the points where I could nitpick about, like on certain parts of the exposition. But I think overall, like they did a perfect job of like, giving the non-fans an idea of like what's going on, what's important in this universe, what are the political tensions that are going on. Johnny, what do you think?
Yeah, well, so I'll say this real quick. I went with I think I might have mentioned this on the show before, but I went with my sister-in-law and I went with my brother. And she has read the book. She's not seen the Lynch film or the miniseries. I've of course read the book. I'm very familiar with. I haven't seen the Lynch film, but I'm very familiar with it. And also my brother, who has not seen anything and has not read anything, so complete newbie. And he came out and he was very. He likes movies. He got me into movies as a kid, but he is not to the level like that I am. Obviously, like I went and studied film in college and whatnot. And he has a little bit more general audience style taste, I would say. And he came out and we talked in the parking lot, and he seemed so like, I don't even know how to describe it. Like kind of almost like bewildered in a way, like in a good way, in a way that he was like, I really love that, but I don't even know like how to process exactly everything I just saw. And then this morning, he texts me and he says, I read a lot of Dune history last night. And then, so we talked a little bit about that, and he's finding out more about the Bene Gesserit, and he's finding out things about, Duncan, Idaho. And then he texts me just a few minutes ago as we're getting ready to do the show. And he says, I've told a few people at work they need to go see Dune. So I think that's the thing with this, like with Star Wars or Game of Thrones, there's certain things you can point to, at least early on in those series or those shows, where I really love this, or I really like this, or like what this is doing. With Dune and with Villeneuve as an artist, like a filmmaker, I feel like it's a little less precise to point out like what exactly is it that I am getting from this exactly, because it's not like your traditional blockbuster. Like there are blockbuster elements, of course, but it's and part of that is being a part one, because it's not set up like with a traditional arc and story structure. So I think when people come out of it and they have that ending, they're gonna be like, I really like that, but like I have questions about this, and I want to see more of this and this character. So I think that's good, though. I think having a reaction that's different from the norm is a good thing. And from what I've seen and heard, enough people who don't know anything about Dune like this movie and really like it, and are telling other people they like it. And I think that is a good sign. I'm honestly very impressed and not shocked necessarily, because I anticipated that it would be accessible, because I anticipated that it would be a success. And I don't think you can have an inaccessible success with something like Dune. But I'm really happy and impressed with, as you mentioned, the exposition and most of that really working well, not coming off, too overwhelming, and not being too heavy-handed, not explaining every little thing. Doing just enough, with the references to Game of Thrones that you mentioned, Star Wars. People have a sense of a world like this enough at this point that they can kind of, the literacy is on a higher level than it had been potentially at 10, 15 years ago. And so I really do think, again, I heard people coming out, they really liked it. They were talking about the characters. They were talking about stuff that they had seen and images and the sound and whatnot. So I think that's a good thing. And that's part of the reason, honestly, I'm looking forward to going and seeing it more in theaters, because at home, yeah, I can watch it at home. It's great. Still a great movie. But going in there, sitting in there with people, listening to them talk about it before the movie, after the movie, that adds a little bit to me as a fan, just because, we're never going to have this moment again. Like, this is the beginning. Like, this is Dune Part 1. Millions and millions of people are going to be exposed to Dune for the first time, and that's awesome. And that's it's just a very interesting time, because it is kind of like an experiment in a way. And if the reaction is a good one enough, that's where Part 2 comes into play. And I think that is the great thing too, because as you mentioned, all the little details and things that you pick up on, and Garin was asking about that. I think this movie is going to benefit so much from rewatching. And I think in the interim years between this movie coming out this weekend and whenever Part 2 comes out, people are going to rewatch this movie. They're going to rent it. They're going to watch it on HBO Max. They're going to buy it. And they're going to notice new things, and they're going to understand things a little bit more easily. They're going to like the movie more, and they're going to get even more excited about Part 2. And then whenever Part 2 comes out, I think that movie is going to be so good. And I genuinely think it's going to be such an improvement over this movie, which seems impossible. But I think it's going to be more accessible. I think it's going to be more, of course, there's going to be more action. And it's going to be easier when I say accessible, because you've seen 2.5 hours of this world already. You know a lot of the characters, you know a lot of the elements, the machines and the vehicles and the planets and things like that. So I think this is only going to grow finer with time. And I wanted to see it as soon as I got out of the movie, and I wanted to just stay in there and watch more of it. And I think that's a good sign. And I think my brother is just one example of someone who felt similarly to me and has no connection to the franchise.
And the last topic that I want to hear from you, Johnny, before we close for today, like one of the important elements, like because this episode we're looking at the movie overall, like overall reactions and overall themes, was of course the dreams. Like even from the opening sentence in the movie, you have the alien sounding voice that dreams are messages from the deep, and indeed the dreams were like an important element throughout the whole movie. How did you feel like how everything came together about how they used it, how they edited the sequences?
Yes. Okay. So I think the reason Joe Walker, the editor, is going to win the Oscar for this movie, which I think he is largely in part to the dreams and the visions and the way they interconnect with the main narrative, and how they relay information and how that information again comes back around, because it's very impressive. And I mean, everything from what Garin, you've seen this in the clip that we saw with Duncan, he cuts to, I see someone falling in battle and, your death. And I want to protect you. There's a beetle crawling on the ground and there's the starter card where, all these things just come back around and they have extra meaning. And I think that, again, when I say it's going to benefit from rewatches, I think the visions are a big part of that, because watching it the first time, you're like, well, what does that mean? What does that line mean? What does this image mean? Who is that? Now that you've seen it, when you go back and watch it again, you'd be like, oh, that's what that was. That's why that happened. That's who that person was. And there's one scene in particular I thought was just so brilliant and really like shocked me, because we had seen the harvester scene in July. And a lot of people coming out of that, especially Dune fans who are familiar with the book and maybe had read some leaks and things to that degree, they were expecting during this harvester scene for Paul to have visions, to have vivid actual visions. And we know he gets hit with a spice and he's disoriented, he's falling, he's looking around, and you're like, what the hell is going on? And there's like kind of like some sonic things going on. And I know this is a spoiler. I'm not even going to say it because Garin really should just see this for the first time. But what they do with that, and something that again comes back around later, and the way it connects, I thought was just so good and was such a surprise, because I felt the same way when I saw it in July during the harvester sequence. I was like, I'm really surprised they didn't do that with this moment. I really thought that's what was going to happen, and it works. It all really works, and I thought the prescient aspect of it, I thought, was very well portrayed and depicted in a way that, it was like kind of to my expectation, but also it went above and beyond in some elements. Again, talking about that sequence, talking about the ending, the shot of Chani, the close up. I really, really like that stuff, and I'm looking forward to more of that. Hopefully in part 2 and Dune Messiah, because they clearly have a method that they want to exploit with that, and I think that's going to be very cool, visually, as a sensory thing, but also as a storytelling tool and as an element that is not really something we've seen, in other blockbusters, even blockbusters, fantasy movies or shows, things with visions, that it doesn't really work in the same way that this one does. It's much more kind of like abstract, and then the way it comes back together was just very impressive. Marcus, I'd like to hear just a little bit about what you thought about that too.
Yeah, because of course in the book you have like the inner thoughts. You get inside people's heads, and of course we've seen that doesn't translate necessarily to like the screen, like it can even be awkward. And I thought that the visions, the way that, as you mentioned, that it carried the narrative was perfect, because you did get to see like the sense of what's Paul seeing in the future. And especially I talked about this last episode with the tent scene where Paul like really like explodes into all those like future visions, and then you see his emotional reaction to that back into to the tent. I felt that was like as you mentioned, like the editing in its movie was excellent. How they just like timed those visions at the appropriate time, and like really like how you saw at the end, like everything was interconnected. Like like some things were showing like a different path that didn't happen, but at the end, like like it all makes sense. And I think just for the visions alone, you would have to rewatch this movie several times to understand everything that's happening.
Villeneuve is so brilliant. I mean, Joe Walker got nominated for Arrival, and that movie utilizes I said that it's hard to think of a comparison, but it has similar elements with the dreams and the language in that movie. This is something that I pointed out even in the last couple of years, was I'm just thinking about that element of Arrival. How could they use that for the visions and the prescient elements of Dune? And they knocked it out of the park. Him and Villeneuve are a great couple. Their collaboration, I think, adds just so much. I mean, Villeneuve said it himself, if he weren't a director, he'd be an editor. He could edit the movie himself, but what he and Joe Walker do together, what they both bring to the table, and the ideas they bounce off each other, you can sense it in the actual final cut of the movie.
Yeah, I feel we can already talk about this for several more hours, but I know like we need to get ready to see the movie again. The last quick thing I do want to mention is that Johnny, you had mentioned about the beetle. Like there is a reason why there's a beetle there. Like we'll maybe go there into a later episode, but like it's symbolic. So,
it is. It's certainly symbolic. Yeah, and I don't know if you've seen certain people on Twitter or online talking about the symbolism of that. But yeah, that certainly comes around. Villeneuve says he loves nature, and nature is like his god, and it's so clear in the movies he makes, especially in this one, probably more than any other one. The beetle, there are other creatures in the movie as well. The sandworm is the most obvious one. But it's just, there's a living ecosystem and ecology to everything. I think that was just great. Garin, I know you have not said very much, obviously, because you haven't seen the movie yet. But before I tap out, do you want to ask any last things or make any last comments before? Because you're going to see the movie here pretty shortly. So
yeah, no, I love what you said, Johnny, about Denis' genius and his ability to understand this story at such a level that he can interlace all of these elements and then have it all tied together at the end, which I thought he did extremely well in Arrival, for instance, because you start out with Arrival and you're a little bit disoriented, like wait, what timeline am I on, and all that kind of thing. But what I'm excited about is the idea of a master storyteller having all of these elements at his disposal that Frank Herbert wrote 50 years ago, and then just to put this on the screen in just this overwhelming experience. I mean, I couldn't be more giddy. The same way you were laughing in the middle of the movie, that's how I feel inside right now, because I've longed for someone to take this source material and make it into a deep, exciting, overwhelming, satisfying experience. And I feel like you guys are telling me that's what it is. So I guess, am I hearing you right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have to see it. I really have to sit down and watch it again, start to finish. I'm about to go see it in IMAX for the second time. So that'll be like the real final concrete feeling I think about it. Because I've seen all the people I've seen who said they've seen it more and more times. They love it more and more. And I think with any great movie, the more times you see it, you really need to see any movie twice to get a full feel for it. But the more you see it, the greater it becomes, and the more you realize what it's doing. Someone, a prominent film critic yesterday, before earlier in the morning before the movie came out, said, I've seen it 4 times now, he said. these critics, and he said, I'm very confident calling it like a classic or a masterpiece, like at this point. And I can certainly see that now, having just with the less experience than he is at this juncture. But really, last thing I would say as a tip or like advice for going into the movie, just overwhelming, no doubt. So just let it wash over you like the sands of time and all that. It's going to be good. You'll have fun. If it is truly one of the best in theater experiences you'll ever have. I can say that definitively, if nothing else. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, I totally agree. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and sign off. So Johnny, you first.
Absolutely. Johnny Sobchak. Check me out on Twitter. Feel free to follow me on Instagram. Keep up to date with me. This is a very fun time. I'm loving this. I hope you all are too, no matter, how much you don't like the movie, you have your qualms with it. I'd love to hear about that and discuss it. If you love it, that's great too. So just enjoy it. It's a fun time to be a Dune fan, a movie fan, Villeneuve fan, and hopefully onward and upward.
Garin?
And this is Garin on Twitter at Dune Companion. And I couldn't be more excited. And actually having you guys spoilerize it for me actually is making me more excited. So this all worked out.
And this was Marcus Gabriel. So as mentioned at the top of the episode, so this is just the first part of our sub-series covering the review of the movie. So we're going to go into a lot more detail in the coming episodes, potentially having like 2 episodes in the coming week. And then we're going to break it down into different sections and really get into like all those details, things you may have missed, and break it down all for you. So you can find my writing at DuneNewsNet.com, and you can find me on Twitter at DuneNewsNet. Talk to you next week.
We hope you've enjoyed Dune Talk. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and add us to your social feeds. Be the first to hear breaking news and reviews.